welcome to Amy's Book Nook. Today I am recommending Anita Diamant's The Red Tent. Anita Diamant is from the US, American writer. She is still alive, so contemporary. She's a novelist, but she also does nonfiction, so journals and essays, and she also has written books on contemporary Jewish life, which I think is really interesting. The Red Tent was published in 1997. It takes the biblical narrative of the rape of Dinah. She's the daughter of Jacob and Leah. So this is Genesis like 32 or something like that. So think Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph had a sister. Her name is Dinah. In the narrative in the Old Testament, she is raped by this man, and he says he falls in love with her. He says he wants to marry her. Her father and brother say she can't marry anyone who's uncircumcised, so the guy has all of his men circumcised, and while they're still healing, Jacob and the boys kill everybody. So, interesting narrative. I'll leave the theologians to figure out the significance of that one. But in that narrative, the line about her rape, it's just a line, it's just a sentence. She never speaks, we never get her perspective. And so the novel is about Dinah's perspective. It's separated into 3 parts, and the first part she calls my mother's stories, my mother's narratives. And so she talks about Leah, Rachel, and their 2 handmaids as her 4 mothers, and then she tells her own narrative. And then in the 3rd section we end up in Egypt, sort of with the Joseph and the whole Potiphar's wife scenario, but that's all in the background to the story of Dinah. The tagline for this book, or at least the one that's on this edition, is the oldest love story never told. And if that might give you a clue to the way that the relationship between Dinah and the foreign man who proposes marriage is different than in the canonical texts. I loved the pace and setting. It felt like a historical novel, and some would potentially argue that it is. Her experience of family and culture is really well done. Obviously, lots of research went into this novel, but it didn't feel like an idea. It didn't feel like a thought experiment. It felt like a novel. The characters stood up on their own. It reads as an excellent story. As a novel itself, it works without you having read the biblical narrative. Really interesting. So again, we get her point of view. The Red Tent is the name of where the women would go when they menstruate, when they're considered unclean. And it's really this exploration of women's society and women's company within this other context. So yeah, I really loved it. If you're interested in novels that sort of retell from a silent woman's perspective, I would definitely recommend Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia. It tells the story of Aeneas's 3rd wife, if you count Dido as a wife, which I do. She is the mother, essentially, of Rome, and we get her name, and that's we get like 2 references in Virgil's text. And there's a little bit more in Ovid, I think, if I remember correctly, or maybe it's Heroides. Anyway, but this is fantastically well done. We don't get sort of gods in the same way. They're they're not anthropomorphized, they're noumenal, and it actually reminds me a lot of the magic, the way that the magic works in her Earthsea series. I would compare that magic with the way that she does the gods in this book. But you know, Lavinia doesn't speak in Virgil's text, but she does here, and it's really a really beautiful text. Another sort of classical rewriting is Medea by Christa Wolf. Christa Wolf is German. It was originally written in German, I think in 1998, and then translated quite quickly after that. I found it a lot more dense. It was quite slow, but really rewarding. It was rich and beautiful, and it makes you think about the roles that women are cast in, I think, in different contexts. If you're interested in the sort of biblical revision part, there are a couple of books that you might enjoy. Colm Tobin's Testament of Mary, and the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Philip Pullman's The Good Man Jesus and the Scoundrel Christ. His premise here is that Christ and Jesus are two different people. And again, it kind of sounds like a playful thought experiment, which I think on some level it is, but it again, it reads as a full novel, rather than somebody just playing around with an idea. And Pullman's great, right? Like, he's just really interesting. This one is written for a series called the Canongate Myth series. Margaret Atwood also has a book in that series, the Penelopead, which rewrites the story of Odysseus and Penelope from Penelope's point of view. Lots of great revisions in that particular series. But those aside, I think I would start with the Red Tent. It feels quite somehow both domestic and political, somehow really rich, and yet you can feel the desert, like sparseness and desert when they're in the desert, and really interesting sort of acknowledgement of Egyptian gods and Egyptian way of life, and just really interesting. So I hope you give it a read. If you have read it, leave me a comment, tell me what you think about the book. If you have a recommendation for me, please leave it in the comments too. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoy reading. Thanks. Take care.